Good morning. Thank you for joining us today for our Farm Foundation Forum, Customer Demand for Environmental Reporting, a look at environmental impact measurement. We are glad to have the opportunity to engage with you today and are thankful to Farm Credit for their support of this forum. My name is Martha King, and I am the Vice President of Programs and Projects for Farm Foundation, located just outside of Chicago, Illinois. I'm looking forward to today's discussion on environmental impact reporting and the growing consumer demand for this information. Before we get into today's program, I'm going to take just a few moments to share a bit more about Farm Foundation. We are a 501c3 nonprofit working at the intersection of agriculture and society to address challenges that affect the entire food and ag value chain. Specifically, we are an accelerator of practical solutions for agriculture, accelerating people and ideas into action. The three levers we use to accomplish this are policy, innovation, and education. Forums such as today's are just one part of our extensive program of work, which is guided by our mission to build trust and understanding at the intersection of agriculture and society, and our vision to build a future for farmers, our communities, and our world. We rely on partnerships to fund our work and increase our impact. So if you're interested in learning more about funding or partnering with us, I invite you to reach out to explore a collaboration. Now I'd like to take a minute to highlight our Friends of Farm Foundation program. With your enrollment as a friend, you will not only be helping to support the mission and vision of Farm Foundation, but you will also gain exclusive benefits such as first reads of our issue papers, networking opportunities, and much more. Being a friend is an investment in building a better future for farmers, our communities, and our world. To learn more about being a friend of Farm Foundation, go to farmfoundation.org/friends. The link is also being posted in the chat. In addition to learning more about Farm Foundation and our work by visiting our website, I encourage you to connect with us on our social media platforms. If you are posting on social media about this morning's session, we ask that you please use #FarmFoundationForum. And here are a few final housekeeping notes. There will be an audience Q&A session at the end. We'll be using that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, not the chat, to queue up the questions. This forum is being recorded and will be posted on our website at farmfoundation.org, as well as on our YouTube channel. We'll send out that link following today's program. When the forum concludes, you will receive a link to a brief survey. Farm Foundation appreciates your feedback and your time in completing the survey. Now let's turn to today's forum topic. We have an outstanding panel of experts with a diversity of perspectives on measuring environmental impact in agriculture. The discussion will cover a range of considerations, such as what metrics are important to consumers, what strategies are working well for companies, and how the measurements are being validated. It's now my pleasure to introduce as our moderator and discussion leader, a good friend of Farm Foundation, Bruce Knight. Bruce is a nationally recognized expert on conservation, agriculture, and the environment. He is the principal and founder of Strategic Conservation Solutions, a consulting firm focused on agriculture, conservation, and the environment, and technology. Bruce's list of credentials includes service as the Undersecretary for Marketing and Regulatory Programs at the USDA, a role as the Chief of the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and many years' experience in developing U.S. agricultural policies and programs as a congressional staff member and on behalf of major agricultural producer groups. As a third-generation rancher and farmer and lifelong conservationist, Bruce operates a diversified grain and cattle operation using no-till and rest rotation grazing systems. Bruce, thank you for moderating our forum today.
Oh, thank you, Martha, for asking me to do this. And it's such a pleasure to be with you all today. I miss the old Farm Foundation forums at the Press Club in Washington, D.C., but I love this format. There's so many more people are participating. I understand we've got about 300 people out there participating and all signed on for this topic, which is customer demand for environmental reporting. I agreed to sponsor this or help moderate this because of the importance of this issue. As I have worked on market development and ecosystem services and conservation over the last several decades, I see three principles that are really important. First, transparency. Second, repeatability. Third, verification. That's as being absolutely essential for a market, whether you're talking about number 2 yellow corn or the future in number 2 yellow carbon, and making these markets simple, making them repeatable, making them transparent is what so much of this customer demand and environmental services are all about. So with today, we're going to try to unpack this a little bit from the government, a little bit from the private sector, a little bit from one of the providers that's helping on the measurement. And then we'll bring this together at the end with the Q's and A's. So want to encourage everybody, put your questions into the Q&A column so that we can put those up there for those folks. We've got a large panel today, so I'm not going to speak long. We're going to go right into it. Our first speaker today that we're going to hear from is Kate Zook, a good friend of mine. She is the Senior Program Analyst in the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Office of Energy and Environmental Policy. Kate works with USDA leadership to coordinate policy and activities on climate change mitigation, energy, and environmental markets, all for USDA. She's served in a variety of public policy roles, including a term at the White House in the Office of Management and Budget. And despite that time, I still like her. So with that, I want to turn things over to Kate Zook.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bruce, for that introduction. And thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be part of our conversation today. Again, Kate Zook from the Office of Energy and Environmental Policy at USDA. And in that office, just a little background on what we do, we coordinate for 3 topics for all of USDA. And those topics are climate change, environmental markets, and renewable energy policy. So a lot of the themes of environmental impact reporting that we're talking about today are interwoven in the things that we do in our office. And what I want to do today is talk about specifically climate change and greenhouse gas benefit reporting and how that happens at USDA. And I want to zoom out to a 30,000 foot level to help set that stage. And so what we want to cover is a lot. Hopefully I can get through this in 15 minutes, but talking about how we account for those benefits on multiple scales and how science underpins that and is really important to providing credibility of those accounting systems, and then talk a little bit about lessons learned and some examples from public policy intersecting with private sector markets. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So just a level set before we jump in about agriculture's contribution to climate change in the United States. So in the US, ag contributes about 11% of the overall greenhouse gas emissions. And those emissions come from a variety of different sources. The largest source, this is surprising to some folks, is a category that we call agricultural soil management. And in that category is actually things like how we apply nitrogen and fertilizer. And fertilizer is a large source of nitrous oxide, which is a very high global warming potential emission. So soil management, we also have things like enteric fermentation, cow burps, manure management, rice cultivation, urea fertilization, liming, field burning. So what we aim to do is look at all those sources, figure out how we can reduce those emissions. And what makes agriculture a bit unique compared to other sectors is that we can also sequester carbon in the soil to reduce emissions while continuing to provide products and benefits for the broader economy. So that really plays into this idea of producing goods with a better environmental impact. So let's go to the next slide. So what are those practices that can provide greenhouse gas benefits? So this is not an exhaustive list, and this is probably very familiar to most of you on the call, but the things that we look at for different cropping systems are things like cropland management, no-till, low-till, cover crops, organic amendments, things like applying enhanced efficiency fertilizer, how you're managing nitrogen. On grazing and pasture land, it's things like rotational grazing, legume interseeding, nutrient management. In animal systems, largely we look at 2 different categories. One is manure management. So how are you managing that manure? Are you using digesters, covering and flaring lagoons, using solid separation, things like that. And then on the feed management side to target enteric, it's how are you managing that feed? Are you using things that are up and coming like feed additives to reduce those emissions? In the land use change category, we typically talk about things like grassed waterways, applying buffers, planting trees on farms, and then in on-farm energy, it's typically things like energy efficiency improvements. So obviously, again, this is not an exhaustive list, but these are the types of on-farm activities that we aim to quantify the greenhouse gas benefits of on those various scales. So on that, let's go to the next slide. Apologies for this slide. I know this is a lot coming at you hot in the morning, but it's important because it illustrates how we take those practices and feed them into models to produce emissions estimates. And if you look at the gray boxes horizontally, there's 3 scales that we typically do that on at USDA. And those are the national scale, the program scale, and the entity scale. And if you look at the top, at a very high level, what we're doing is we're taking activity data on how are farmers producing food? Are they using those practices that we just talked about? And then feeding that data into models and tools which provide us estimates of the greenhouse gas emissions coming from the sector based on that management. And we feed that into a variety of reports and assessments. So let's break that down a little bit more one by one. If you go to the next slide. So on the national scale, USDA actually works with the Environmental Protection Agency to produce the annual inventory of greenhouse gas emissions and sinks report. We call this the national inventory. And it's a report that covers all the different sectors of the economy. Agriculture is one of those chapters. And USDA actually provides EPA a lot of data to produce that report every year. And that data is on how food is produced and what practices farmers are using. And it comes from a whole bunch of different surveys, largely. And you are probably very familiar, USDA issues a lot of different surveys. There's the Ag Census, the Agricultural Resources Management Survey, or ARMS, the National Animal Health Monitoring Survey, NAMS. None of those are specifically focused on conservation adoption. There's one exception, that's the Conservation Effects Assessment Project, or CEAP. That's very focused on what conservation practices farmers are applying. But in general, these surveys aren't issued every year. And we do this balance of looking at what questions in those surveys can tell us something about conservation adoption on farm. And usually in those surveys, we can pick a few that say something about how that food's being produced and the benefits that that's providing for climate. So there's questions about cover crop adoption, for example, or manure management systems that are being used. And we piece that together and package that data to EPA. That's applied into large models that are state of the science, and we produce these giant estimates for every year what those emissions profiles are. There is a lot of room for improvement here. If you look at the graph on the right, this is the history of the trends of emissions from the agriculture sector from 1990 to 2020. And when I look at this, the big takeaway for me is there's not much of a trend. It's pretty flat. And there are many reasons for this, but one is that we're not doing a great job of actually picking up those conservation practices and reflecting them in this inventory. We know anecdotally that a lot of these conservation practices are being applied, but we can do a better job of being more frequent in terms of reporting trends and also reporting some of those newer technologies that we're not doing a great job of, such as enhanced efficiency fertilizers, biochar, pasture management, feed management. So there's a real effort within USDA now to shore up our ability to do this national level reporting on a more accurate way. So if you go to the next slide. On the program scale, this is more about getting a handle on the greenhouse gas benefits that are provided by USDA's investments. So most of you are probably familiar with the large programs that USDA administers that provide conservation benefits. Many of these are through the Natural Resources Conservation Service, things like the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, EQIP, the Conservation Stewardship Program, CSP, the Conservation Reserve Program, CRP, rural development programs to provide energy benefits, forest service programs that provide benefits through planting trees, et cetera. And what we want to be able to do is say, for those investments, what are the greenhouse gas benefits that we are providing? We have a lot of customers for that information. The Hill, Congress, the White House, the public, the private sector, folks are really interested in, for the taxpayer dollars that we're investing, what are the benefits we're getting in terms of greenhouse gas emissions? And the way that we do this, we actually use the same underlying science and models and estimation methodologies that we use on the national scale. But as opposed to the national scale, where we're doing sort of representative estimations of the sector's adoption, here it's a census. It's what are we paying for? What's in those contracts and what are we getting? USDA is also working at improving that right now. We're building an internal dashboard that allows us to visualize those investments over time, and it's interactive. So you can look at a specific state, you can look at a specific practice, And it should allow us to tell a much better story of how we're providing climate benefits for our investments. If you go to the next slide. So let's go the whole way down to the entity scale or the farm scale. So this is where USDA actually has a lot to build on, including USDA methodology. So that picture of the report there on the right, quantifying greenhouse gas fluxes in ag and forestry, methods for entity scale inventory. This is an absolute tome. This thing is like a doorstop. It's a huge report that we issued in 2014. And essentially what it does is it sort of compiles very well peer-reviewed methodologies for estimating greenhouse gas emissions and carbon storage in croplands, grasslands, livestock, forestry, wetlands, and for land use change. And the methodology in that feeds tools that are online, like the Comet Farm and Comet Planner tools, which we developed in partnership with Colorado State University, that allow farmers to go online, outline their farm, enter some management practices, and look at changes in emissions associated with changes in management so that they can see on a farm scale how their greenhouse gas profile would change by adopting a variety of different conservation practices. And so what we're doing now is actually looking at that methodology. It was issued in 2014, and we're updating it. You know, the science has changed. We're looking at what new methods are out there, and the new methods will go out for public input, or RFI, or request for federal information on how those methods look, and we're looking at publishing those new methods by the end of the year. So there's a lot coming for this, and those methods underpin our entity scale tools, our program scale estimation, and our national scale inventory. So they're a really, really critical piece of the overall picture of how we approach quantification of greenhouse gas emissions at USDA. If you go to the next slide. And the science that we use to inform that methodology is extremely critical. And I'm just going to use one example here, and that is on soil carbon. Soil carbon is one of those areas that's received a lot of attention as of late, and there's a lot of questions around it. It's something that we're very interested in USDA as well. And last year, we issued a $10 million program to better understand the soil carbon changes associated with our Conservation Reserve Program, our CRP program. And so there's 1,000 sites across the US looking at how soil carbon has changed with adoption of those practices. And this builds on existing work. The NRCS about a decade ago issued the Rapid Carbon Assessment, the RACA program, which was 6,000 sites across the US. Ideally, what we'd like to do is build on this to create a consistent network of sampling sites across the United States in different cropping systems, different soil types, and different regions to better understand how soil carbon fluxes change with management. Having that type of underlying science is really critical to helping us make good decisions and inform those models that we use. So next slide. So I'm going to take a hard transition to the right here and talk about how some of these methodologies and systems are applied not within government, but in the private sector in environmental impact reporting and some other systems. And I'm going to draw on carbon markets as an example of where things have actually gone a bit sideways and talk about that. So when we talk about an accounting system, it's not just quantification and measurement. It's also monitoring and reporting and verification to create this system that allows us to feel really credible about what we're reporting. And typically that's referred to as MMRV, measurement, monitoring, reporting, and verification. And in carbon markets, these systems are kind of set up by a variety of different registries. And so the registries, and I have 3 across the top here, American Carbon Registry, Climate Action Reserve, and Verra, the Verified Carbon Standard, they issue protocols or sort of like the recipe of how you can generate offsets from different practices in agriculture that can reduce emissions. So things like grassland practices, livestock practices, et cetera. So there are a lot of protocols out there actually that could be used today. There are about 35 protocols out there, but 25 of them have actually never been used, like never generated an offset. So why is that? Let's go to the next slide. There are a lot of reasons. Agricultural projects tend to be small in terms of the number of offset tons they generate compared to other project types. But they still need to go through all the same hoops for verification and reporting, resulting in high transaction costs. Also, because there are multiple registries out there offering different protocols for the same project type, there is some confusion in the marketplace. If you're a producer, you're kind of looking at all this saying, what's going to give me the best bang for a buck? What should I enter into? And as a result, there's limited demand. There's a certain price point that farmers typically need to enter into these market schemes to make them pencil out. And at the current price point in the voluntary market, these projects tend to, again, be a little more expensive than other project types like forestry, industrial, and landfill projects. And so they're hard to compete. And so because of all of this, agricultural offsets in the voluntary market only make up about 2% of that market share. So in the end of the day, farmers aren't ultimately seeing the benefits of that market. And all of this could change. If there's a new market driver, if there's a new protocol that comes online that allows for scale and aggregation, certainly this could change. However, to date, we haven't really seen that. So if you go to the next slide, how do we apply that as lessons learned to supply chains? USDA just made a big investment in this. Earlier this year, USDA launched the Partnerships for Climate Smart Commodities program. And so this program is going to fund projects that meet 3 main objectives. And those are to pilot climate smart practices on a large scale, to monitor, verify, and report those climate benefits, and then finally to develop markets for the resulting climate smart commodities. So USDA received over $18 billion of proposals. The window has closed for this $1 billion program, and there's $8 billion of match. So clearly we've really tapped into a need here. And I think it demonstrates the need from the consumer end, where there really is this demand out there that consumers are interested in purchasing commodities that have a lower greenhouse gas footprint. And so we're really interested in what these projects are going to come up with. We're currently in the stage of evaluating those applications, and announcements on awards should be made later this summer. If you go to the next slide. So what we want to do is learn as much as we can about the systems that we can set up that work on different scales and in these supply chain frameworks that work not just for companies and consumers, but also for farmers themselves. Because again, it's not just about the quantification of the practices, but it's about verifying that that practice is providing benefits and monitoring that that practice is in place and doing that in a way that's both credible and affordable and efficient. And it's not an easy nut to crack. So we're planning to learn as much as we can from these big projects that we'll be issuing. And to that end, we're setting up a learning network, which will include all the folks who have won awards through this program. And we'll be discussing a whole variety of things that we want to learn more about. Those are approaches to quantification and monitoring, verification, traceability, marketing, and ultimately what's going to work for producers. We know that setting up these systems that are extremely credible, that also function at scale, are really important. And we also know that it's important to the farm community. And totally separate from this program or what's going on at USDA, this has come up recently in response to the proposed rule from the Securities and Exchange Commission, which would require public companies to disclose climate-related risks to investors. And as part of those disclosures, companies would be required to report their greenhouse gas emissions, potentially including from their upstream and downstream supply chain activities. And there are a lot of unknowns around what producers might need to be required to provide in terms of data and information to comply with these rules. So, critically, we want to provide certainty in the benefits that are coming from these systems, but we also need to make sure that they work for all the folks along those chains. And so with that, I will stop there. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion. Hopefully I didn't take too much of your time, Bruce, and thanks again for having me.
Wow, Kate, I've got 15, 20 questions listed here just that I want to ask, but I'm not in that role right now. So we're going to move on in and continue to peel the layers of this onion off. So we've had a little bit about the markets and this overview coming from Kate. Now we're going to get a individual company perspective from Keith Pitts. Keith is the Chief Sustainability Officer and Senior Vice President for Regulatory and Government Affairs at Marrone Bio Innovations. He joined Marrone Bio in 2008 after working at the U.S. Department of Agriculture as a special assistant to Deputy Secretary Richard Rominger and to Secretary Dan Glickman. He led several key agriculture, environment, and food safety initiatives for USDA and the Clinton administration, such as the President's initiative to ensure the safety of imported and domestic fruits and vegetables. He also served as public policy director for the Pew Initiative on Food and Biotechnology, where he led all of the organization's policy-related activities. Most importantly, both Keith and I were on Capitol Hill at the time when he was working for Congressman Charlie Rose. So thank you for joining us, Keith.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in the panel. I'm here kind of tag teaming with our colleagues at Boundless Impact that has done some work on life cycle assessments or climate impact assessments for a few of our products. They're going to get into the details of these assessments. And what I thought I'd do is talk a little bit about how we made the decision to start doing these life cycle analyses and how we're using these particular tools and some of the interesting discussions that have stemmed from getting a few of these life cycle assessments out on our pesticide products. We also do have a portfolio of bionutrient, biofertilizer products as well. So we're trying to figure out a kind of spidergram framework for those products as well, so people can have actual side-by-side comparisons about how different products look from a variety of environmental and human health perspectives. So in our case, just a little bit about the company. Our R&D facilities are based in Davis, California. We primarily develop biopesticide products, so plant extract, microbial-based products. All of our EPA registered products sold commercially are also certified for use in organic agriculture. In 2019, we acquired ProFarm Industries, a Helsinki, Finland-based company that basically takes material that's waste stream from paper manufacturing and takes that lignin and converts it into a bionutrient product that's sold both as foliar and seed treatment. Between the two companies, with our US and European operations, we had the bionutrient product out on about 25 million acres of sunflowers, oilseed, rape, and corn in Europe. And we have a bionematicide product that we're currently working with Alba on. It was on about 15 million acres of corn, cotton, and soy in 2020. Last week, we were acquired by Bioceres Crop Solutions, an Argentine-based company that basically sells seed. They have their own traded seed. They have a drought tolerance trait and also have a portfolio of seed inoculants and fertilizers as well. They're on about close to 25% of all soybean as a seed treatment worldwide. So have a significant footprint as a small company in both the specialty crop and row crop markets. So back to the life cycle analyses. We basically, this stemmed from, for me, some frustration and discussions around sustainable pest management, which I found often just devolved into when we were participating in various sustainability fora. It typically settled on whatever the crisis du jour was. So a lot of discussions around glyphosate and neonics and chlorpyrifos, and really never got discussions off the ground about sustainable pest management in general and how it plays into ecosystem services. And certainly one of my goals is trying to figure out ways to get incentives in the pockets of growers when we ask them to do all these things that are beneficial to society. So as I stepped back and looked at what I could contribute to the discussion, was I can do an assessment of greenhouse gas emissions on our products and at least get that information out to our customers. That led me to, through a board member of our company at the time, steered me to Boundless Impact, and I started looking at some of the life cycle assessment work that they were doing on other products that weren't necessarily ag related, but I saw a consistent theme here of a spidergram and key metrics that you could measure, and then also compare the performance of your products against competitors' products. And what initially started as a greenhouse gas emissions and carbon return on investment discussion quickly turned into what else could we integrate into a climate impact analysis for pesticides. And one thing about pesticides is we have to generate a lot of GLP toxicity data. So it's considered the gold standard in data that's actually used to conduct risk assessments on our products. And every pesticide product that is out there has to basically generate this data and submit it to regulators before they're allowed to go on the market. So a robust data package. And as we started breaking out what kind of data we had in hand, certainly we have to do a lot of mammalian toxicity testing on our products, so that covers both human health, so pesticide residue issues that are certainly a key concern for consumers when they think about sustainable pest management. But we also do generate a variety of aquatic toxicity, non-target organism toxicity testing. We also do testing on certain microorganisms or non-target organisms in the soil. So things like earthworms, how we affect beneficial microorganisms. All of that is also part of our toxicity packages. So what we were able to do is basically come up with a framework that you see here in front of you and use it as an analytical tool. So we continue to work with other companies that are interested in developing this framework. I consider it, we're using these for three things. One, we are obviously using them for marketing tools. So certainly as we talk about our products to our customers and the broader public, it's a nice way to capture how we look relative to other products that are available out there. We also do make these available to our customers. In our case, BioST, which is our seed treatment product, is carried, nematicidal seed treatment product is carried by Alba. So they are using that with all of their seed customers. We also have a partner that's carrying our products in the home and garden market through the Arbor brand name. And they've gotten positive feedback from some of the retailers that are carrying their products like Walmart and Target. And we certainly are committed to continue developing these life cycle assessments for our customers. And the other thing that we've used these tools for are basically just to make decisions around how we can improve our environmental performance. When we looked at both Venerate XC and BioST, we were basically able to make a decision to convert our operations to all renewable energy, and we've been able to see a fairly significant impact on our greenhouse gas emissions by making that decision alone. We haven't run the numbers completely yet, but we're thinking probably making the decision to switch our Davis R&D campus and our Michigan fermentation and manufacturing plant to all renewable energy. We're going to get a 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions thereabout with that decision alone. The third thing that's really been interesting about this for me is it has generated some phone calls from entities that I'm not used to having discussions with. So some of the carbon trading platforms have reached out to us, some crop insurance companies as well. And the comments from them has been, basically, we know carbon sequestration, carbon trading is not always a clean play or easy play for agriculture for a lot of the reasons that Kate laid out. But we see a building block here for a discussion around perhaps there's a way we can figure out how to evaluate integrated pest management or pest management decisions in a way that we are able to create environmental credit trading platforms or risk management platforms that help encourage growers to move towards more sustainable or more biologically based practices. And that's started an interesting discussion with a lot of people, people like Bruce, USDA, Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research, some historic people that have been involved in the integrated pest management or IPM community for a number of years. And I think there's a lot of interest in seeing if we can weave together the various threads that are available to us there to create what I'll call a circular economy around IPM or integrated crop management, whatever you want to call it these days. But for over 20 years, our IPM funding at USDA has been flat. Usually the only times we get significant bumps in IPM research and implementation are around crises. So the first big slug of IPM funding happened in the early 70s, basically in reaction to Silent Springs publication and the formation of an establishment of EPA. The second one that I'm aware of was Food Quality Protection Act implementation back in the late 90s and early 2000s when basically we changed a lot of how we looked at pesticides and did risk assessments. So there was concern. We did lose quite a few chemistries in implementing that act, but we at that time did develop a very robust IPM research and implementation program that was tied into the regulatory process at EPA. And we were able to successfully avert a big crisis there. Growers were able to work with USDA and EPA to get new products on the market quickly and get their adoption. But once that crisis went away, the funding evaporated. I do feel like we're getting in a phase now where a lot of pest management tools are under scrutiny again. And for us, it's worth making that investment in IPM and figuring out a way that we can increase research, increase implementation, find ways to evaluate different IPM or integrated crop management practices, how we can incentivize those with growers, and how we can basically confirm or validate that the practices were done, and then loop it back in to continued research. So very interested in getting that discussion started. We're hoping that we're going to kick off this 21st century IPM dialogue. It'll be probably the first time in over 20 years there's been a multi-stakeholder discussion about IPM. I think we can all even look back and say there's a lot of new tools that are available to growers that weren't even available 5 years ago. Big data has a lot to play in this monitoring. There's a lot of different monitoring options out there. Precision agriculture, there's just a lot of new tools in the gene editing space, and also the significant growth in the adoption and use of biologicals in agriculture. And we do see some of these opportunities with other ways to incentivize programming, not only through traditional farm programming where there's discussions around ecosystem services, but clearly carbon trading platforms or environmental credit platforms are looking at opportunities to create new instruments for growers or for those that are purchasing goods for growers, but also some in the crop insurance space that are looking for ways to provide risk management for tools for growers that do want to try and transition to organic or regenerative or some other defined sustainable ag practice. So I'll just leave it here. One reason I did the side-by-side comparison of two spider grounds, this is basically the exact same product used for different uses. And that's why I like these life cycle assessment analyses. You can see Venerate XC, which is a foliar applied insecticide. scores pretty well in a scale of 10, but not nearly as well as the nematicidal seed treatment. And basically that just comes down to application rate. The seed treatment rate is at a rate that's quite close to what synthetic chemicals go on with the seed treatment. Our foliar application for this particular product is going to be higher relative to some synthetic pesticides. So our performance on greenhouse gas emissions didn't look quite so good relative to the synthetics. But again, overall, a good story here on a variety of key metrics that we know our customers are concerned about, and also creates an opportunity for me to think about what can I do to improve my performance. So hence the decision to switch to all renewable energy at our facilities, and also give us some indication of how to improve our products and get their application rate down. We've recently have done that with a new version of this product. So I'm very excited to see what these numbers look like when we get that product approved by EPA, but it'll be going on at rates comparative to synthetic chemicals at a price comparative to synthetic chemicals, both foliar and seed. So I'm pretty excited about where we're going with this particular product portfolio, and our relationship with Boundless Impact on generating these climate impact analyses, which I do think are an important part, but not the only part, but an important part of a discussion around how we can start placing value on pest management decisions, and hopefully coming up with an incentive structure that is workable for growers and beneficial to their customers, who are also our customers, as well as consumers. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Keith. And I remind everybody, put your questions into the Q&A box, not the chat box. Put your questions into the Q&A box. With Keith's opened the door on how companies can actually use the LCA work to manage the firm's decisions, and conceivably how it may enter into the marketplace, especially those carbon markets that Kate was looking at. But you can't make these decisions out without a good spider diagram. And what we've got next is Michelle's going to give us a peek behind the scenes of how you actually get to those sexy spider diagrams that are used so often now in sustainability. So who we're going to hear from now is the team at Boundless Impact. We're joined by Michele Demers, who will then hand off the mic to Fernanda Avila Swinburn. Michele has 25 years of experience as an entrepreneur, business executive, impact measurement expert. She's founder and CEO of Boundless Impact Research and Analytics, an industry research and impacts analytics platform that does this sort of evidence-based research and data for the investment community. Boundless also offers Scope 3 climate impact. We'll count on her to explain what Scope 3 is across a growing number of emerging sectors. Then Fernanda Avila Swinburn is the senior research analyst at Boundless. She holds master's degrees in sustainability management and electrical engineering and sustainability management, with a focus on renewable energy, sustainability strategies, data analysis, and life cycle assessment. With that, I'm going to turn things over to you, Michele, and you take it from here.
Thanks very much, Bruce. And thank you to the Farm Foundation for holding this discussion. I think it's a really important one. Hi, everyone. Great to meet you. I am founder and CEO of Boundless Impact Research and Analytics. If we could go to the next slide, I'll just jump right in. I'm going to try to move through these slides relatively quickly so we can get to the meat of the discussion. I'm going to more or less tell you a little bit about what we do and why we do it, and why I think it's important for this particular, for the sort of ag sector. And then I'm going to have Fernanda dive into this assessment we did and show you in some more detail how we do the work we do and how it can be useful. So we're an industry research and a data analytics company, and we work across a number of clean tech sectors, but we are doing an awful lot of work in the ag tech sector because of how much growth there is and investment opportunity. Next slide. And our methodology, so I saw the list of the folks attending, and it's a very sophisticated audience, so I hope I'm not repeating things, but for the purposes of background, LCA is life cycle assessment, and it is important to understand why it's so critical to use life cycle assessment to actually not only measure and validate data, but to understand why it is more science-based, and there's more of a kind of tradition of actual data validation using independent industry experts. Then there's a lot of new calculators that are sort of AI-based calculators that are using a lot of data that is scraped, that isn't always necessarily as reliable as it hopefully one day will be. But it is really important to do the homework of going into the scientific literature, as Fernanda is going to explain to you, is what we do, and looking at kind of what data is out there about other technologies in the same industry. And this LCA method looks either cradle to gate, which is looking at where the materials come from, the manufacturing process and the production of the actual product. And sometimes it can be a different system boundary where we look all the way to what's called cradle to grave, where we actually look at the use of the product, the end of life, and then the disposal. And life cycle assessment is very important to understand. Actually, one other thing, it's been around for several decades. Life cycle analysis has been in the environmental engineering field since the 70s. It's highly respected. It's ISO compliant, so there are international standards set around the measurement of life cycle assessment. Why don't we move to the next slide? And we do what we call rapid LCA, because what we realized is that life cycle assessment can be very cumbersome and academic, and there's a lot of benefits that companies can get from doing life cycle assessments. But sometimes they can take a really long time if you are doing a really deep academic LCA. And we realize there's a kind of a more rapid format for doing it, where we're not losing the scientific rigor, but we're allowing emerging clean tech companies and ag tech companies to be able to actually understand their full footprint and compare it to their competitors. Next slide. And what we do is we select metrics for an industry, and we call them EKPIs, environmental key performance indicators. And what we do is we build benchmarks around those using the scientific literature, as well as there are a lot of LCA databases out there with reference data that we can use when we're having trouble finding data in the scientific literature. But we don't usually have that much difficulty, because we work with industry experts that guide us into looking into the right places. What's also important to note about LCA is it's highly rigorous. It's statistically rigorous. You're looking for patterns in data, as Fernanda is going to walk you through. And what that results in is very accurate, reliable information about the competitor. We collect data from the company. We compare it to those benchmarks we've built on the competition. And it enables us to really understand where performance is and ought to be in an industry. Next slide. Sorry if I'm rushing. I just know we have only two of us. We have two of us for our presentation. So I'm gonna just quickly touch on scope 1, 2, and 3. The UN-GHG protocol has set out different levels of emissions that companies ought to be reporting on. Scope 1 is your direct emissions from operations. That's pretty straightforward. Scope 2 are the emissions from your heat, your hot water, your HVAC. in your central operations. It's really only scope 3 where, and you really need LCA to do scope 3. It's looking at where the materials come from. It's the supply chain emissions, it's the transportation emissions, it's the waste emissions. And scope 3 is really where most emissions are for most companies. And McKinsey did a study that showed something like up to 85 or 90% of most companies' emissions are scope 3. Next slide. And so we do our work and we do this very scientifically rigorous work, and customers are happy because they're getting their data actually, or they're getting their performance actually validated. And companies are using our reports. So we do these assessments, they take a number of weeks, which I'll tell you, and they're using them not only for marketing or fundraising, but they're learning about their competition. So they're able to adjust their product or their operations accordingly. Next slide. We do different levels of analysis. We do GHG assessment and projections only. And for earlier stage companies, we do what we call a basic environmental impact assessment, where we look at 3 or 4 metrics. Sometimes that includes GHG projections as well. Next slide. And then we also, our most popular is the full environmental impacts assessment. It is the closest thing we do to an LCA, where we look at multiple metrics and shows those spider graphs that Keith pointed out, and we're going to review for you. And then we do, of course, the scope 1, 2, and 3 inventories, which is not a product life cycle. It's looking at your full operation and the emissions involved with that. Next slide. And companies, as I said, are using these in their reporting and finding them highly useful. Next slide. So I just have a couple things I want to say before I hand it over to Fernanda. There's been, Kate already did an excellent job of laying out kind of the opportunities in the carbon economy. And, you know, it's growing very rapidly. I think there's a lot of opportunities for incentives to be created for farmers and for growers and for their customers, as well as for the other stakeholders in the agricultural sector. There's carbon offsets, there's carbon credit markets, there are voluntary markets, there are regulated markets. The voluntary market is really growing fast. And as Kate was saying, there's a lot of these new emerging carbon credit registries, but there's really only 7 that are considered official. And then there are exchanges globally. The European trading system is an example of a carbon exchange, and that is almost a $2 billion market at this point. Next slide. And Kate already mentioned this, so I'm gonna just move on to the next slide. So what we see, and that we're pretty excited about, is that if you measure beyond just GHG, obviously GHG is really important, but there are other metrics that Fernanda is going to walk you through that we measured when we did the analysis of MBI. And we think it creates a really interesting opportunity for a biodiversity credits market that will be and can be just as rich as the carbon credits markets. Just so you all know, there's already an ocean plastics credits market that is active and growing, because that's another area of concern in the kind of circular economy. And I'm going to hand it over to Fernanda now, just because I want to give her time to go through our actual assessment of MBI. Over to you, Fernanda.
Thank you, Michele. Can we go to the next one? And next one, please. Thank you. So now I will walk you through the methodology for doing the environmental impact assessment in the crop protection industry. And I will be using the assessment we did for MBI's BioSD as an example on how we build the metrics and to show you how the results look like. So as Michele was explaining, we base our methodology on life cycle assessment. And life cycle assessment is this technique to assess the environmental impact associated with all of the stages of the product life, from the raw material extraction through the material processing, manufacture, distribution, use, end of life, etc. And we call it rapid LCA or rapid life cycle assessment because our process is quicker and more cost effective than the traditional life cycle assessments. And one of the ways we manage to do this is by picking the metrics that makes the most sense to the industry. In the case of the crop protection industry, we measure the set of metrics you can see on the slide. A greenhouse gas footprint, which is a very popular metric right now, as we all know, because it's directly related to the global warming and therefore climate change. We also measure acute human toxicity potential and also biodiversity metrics. And as previously discussed, this is very relevant and being requested by customer, and therefore it's also being needed to be measured. And in this category, we have the pollinator toxicity potential, aquatic toxicity, and soil toxicity. And finally, we also measure carbon return on investment, which is a hybrid environmental and financial metric that relates the GHG performance of a product with its financial performance. And I will walk you through some of these metrics in more detail. Also worth mentioning, to keep this assessment independent, we hire an independent expert to review the information provided by the company to make sure everything is sound and review the methodology and the results of the assessment. Next, please. So the first step of assessing the life cycle of a product is to define the scope and system boundary. The boundaries of this analysis is what we call a cradle to gate, meaning that we are considering everything from the raw material that goes into the product to the finished product at the gate of the production facility. Then the following step is to develop the life cycle inventory for the product. This includes the type, quantity, and origin of the raw materials, the transportation of those materials to the production facility, any electricity, fuel, and water inputs, and finally, to assess the impact of every input and process, we mostly rely on the EcoInvent, which is a well-renowned life cycle assessment database. And for BioST, our analysis show that the GHG or greenhouse gas footprint is 1 kilogram of CO2e per liter of product, or 0.5 kilograms of CO2e per million seed treated with the product. And as you can see, most of the emission in this case are coming from the steam used in the production. Next, please. And then to put the greenhouse gas footprint into context, we build industry benchmarks to understand how the different types of insecticides compare to each other. We select the industry benchmarks considering our own research, the company experience, and also our independent expert opinion. In the case of BioST, the industry benchmark are some type of neonicotinoids, abemactin, diamides, and as well as other biopesticides with similar functionality as BioST. And as Michele was explaining, to build the industry benchmarks, we rely mostly on scientific publications, academic journals, public papers, reports, and also the guidance of the industry expert. This process is very rigorous. We don't pick just one data point. We gather as much data as possible for each competitor and for each metric in order to find patterns in data. And to calculate the metric for the company, in this case for MBI, we gather the information directly from them using a request for information that has around 20 to 30 questions about their product and production process. And in this case, for the BioST, we estimated two scenarios, one considering grid electricity and one considering wind energy. And in both scenarios, as you can see, the greenhouse gas footprint is lower than that of their competitors. Next, please. And now moving to the toxicity metrics. These metrics and the ones I'll show after are not what you will find usually on a traditional life cycle assessment. Acute human toxicity measures the toxicity of insecticides to humans according to the globally harmonized system of classification and labeling. And we developed these toxicity metrics specifically for this crop protection industry considering the importance of humans and ecosystem health in the industry and the information that's readily available. And as Kate explained, when we did this assessment, it was important for NBI to repurpose the toxicity data they already have from the field trials they ran to comply with regulatory requirements. And then for these metrics, we use the acute toxicity information that you can find on the safety data sheets of the different products assessed. So in this case, abemactin is the most toxic of the insecticides, as you can see here, with a considerably high toxicity level for all categories, especially through oral ingestion of the product. Next, please. This pollinator toxicity potential measures the toxicity to bees resulting from the use of the insecticides. And harming pollinator has been one of the main concerns with the use of pesticides, especially because pollinators are responsible for the reproduction of plants that contribute to the food system of animals, including us, humans, birds, and insects. And this metric is based on the lethal dose that results in the 50% mortality to bees. 10 represents the highest level of toxicity, and 0 represents almost no toxicity. This is also information we can gather from standard field trials, and we can get it from the safety data sheets of the products. And as we see here, neonicotinoids and abemactin have the highest level of toxicity to bees. And this means that 0.016 or between 0.016 and 0.54 micrograms of the product can kill bees. For this metric, we need to consider that the hazard is mitigated by the application of this product as seed treatment. Next, please. Similarly to the previous metric, this one measures the toxicity to aquatic organisms, specifically fish and invertebrates. And this is based also in the lethal dose that results in the mortality to fish, and also the lethal concentration that results in the immobilization to aquatic invertebrates. Again, 10 represents the highest level of toxicity, and 0 represents almost non-toxicity. And we can see here that abemactin is very toxic both for invertebrates and fish, and diamide is also very toxic to invertebrates. And BioST and the other bioinsecticides have a low toxicity to aquatic life. Next, please. So the last metric I will show you is the soil toxicity potential. This represents the toxicity to soil dwelling organisms from the use of insecticides. And it's also based on the lethal concentration, with 10 representing the highest level of toxicity. And going back to the previous point of using readily available information, we found in the literature that in the absence of more complex studies, earthworms can be a good indicator of soil health. And that's why we are using this metric to represent soil toxicity. And as we can see here, abemactin and neonicotinoids are the two insecticides with the highest level of toxicity from the ones considered. Next one. So to close the presentation, I will be showing again the spider charts. These charts summarize the results of the two assessments we've done for NBI, the BioST and the Venerate XC. As Kit already told us, these are the same product, but they have different applications. Therefore, the industry benchmarks and therefore the scores are different. So 10 here represents the best score among the competitors. And because we are comparing the products to different industry benchmarks, we cannot really compare Venerate to BioST, but we can see that BioST has a better performance against their competitors than Venerate. Next one. Well, and with that, I will conclude my presentation. Feel free to contact me if you have any more questions. And thank you again, the Farm Foundation, for this invitation.
Thank you so much, Michele and Fernanda, for that. That brings us to the final speaker. before we go to the Q&A. And again, put your questions in the Q&A box, not the chat box. And I'm looking at those. I see 7 in. I want to encourage more. Lord knows you want to hear the questions from you all, not from me, that come to folks. But next up is Dr. Dorn Cox. Dr. Cox serves as research director and OpenTEAM project lead at Wolfe's Next Center for Agriculture and the Environment, a leader in regenerative agriculture, a nonprofit research and education center, and a working 600-acre organic dairy diversified farm on the east coast of Maine. What I also like, and I've served on several panels with Dorn, what I really appreciate as well is that he is also an active manager of his family's farm in New Hampshire. And so he's got that grounding of the farm background with the research. He's co-founder of the Farm OS software platform and the gathering from Open Ag Tech and the Farm Hack community. In 2018, his work as an NACD soil health champion was recognized with the inaugural Hugh Hammond Bennett Award. That, of course, was the founder of the SCS. And in 2019, Dorn was awarded the Food Shot Global Groundbreaker Prize. Welcome, Dorn, and thank you for batting cleanup with the panel today.
Thanks so much, Bruce. It's a great pleasure to be here again. Dorn Cox, as Bruce mentioned, I'm really just so pleased to be here on this panel and having this conversation. It's been a long time coming, and there's just so much good, meaningful work ahead for us to be doing together. So, as you mentioned, I'm project lead for OpenTEAM, but my background, in addition to being a farmer, is in natural resources, earth system science, biogeochemistry, tech, and finance. But on a more personal note, the direction I took around focusing on soil health in particular, I really a credit to Klaus Martens, and actually connecting a little bit with you, Bruce, on the soil renaissance work, initially about 10 years ago. And really recognizing the role that agriculture has as a natural climate solution, and something that we can each do to mitigate and adapt and increase resilience, environmental sustainability, and profitability, this amazing win-win-win scenario, as we're able to ask better questions together and build better enterprises together. So I think this is just a really exciting direction as we're asking more of agriculture. And I think this is sort of the big innovation, is that we're not asking just for food, fiber, and energy to feed the world, but we're asking for all sorts of new services and, climate mitigation and adaptation, biodiversity, water quality, quantity, wildfire mitigation, and the list goes on and on. And other than those commodity outputs, food, fiber, and energy, everything else requires a baseline scientific observation and data. It requires the creation of these public goods from private enterprises, and that requires a different kind of science, a different kind of public science, a different kind of trust, and it's a multi-generational effort that we're starting to value. And a lot of the work here is like, how do we create that trust? I mean, I think Bruce framed it when we started, the transparency, repeatability, verifiability. How do we deliver that so we can move into the next generation of potential to transform our landscapes, our working landscapes, and waterfronts, and managing our environment both profitably, but also in a way in which we're improving them over time. I mean, I think that's the really exciting opportunity that we have. And we know that stories about this move people, but numbers move markets. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what OpenTEAM is doing today, about how do we create both the data, the trusted data, and the data-driven storytelling to move both people and markets. And so I think Kate also touched a little bit on this in terms of the measurement, reporting, and verification, and the life cycle assessment, and all the data that's necessary to drive this. But how do we put that into context? And so that's really what OpenTEAM is about, is creating not just the tools, those are necessary but not sufficient, but we need to have the skills in the field to actually implement them. They need to be accessible to producers. We need to have incentives and successful examples. And so OpenTEAM, we founded about 3 years ago, was built on about a decade's worth of work at open technology, bringing together, recognizing it can't just be food companies, it can't be just government agencies or research universities or environmental service markets or farmer rancher networks. We really needed, how do we do this together? How do we collaborate and create that? And so we've grown to more than 45 organizations, and it's expanded actually since then to, as we look beyond just measuring soil health, but how do we finance and create transitional finance mechanisms and those incentives and skills to support that. Next slide. So we started again with this concept, and I'll mention a little bit about the acronym of OpenTEAM. Open because it needs to be trusted and large scale, and open so we can build on one another's work, because this is too complex for any company or any government on earth to do and be trusted. Technology ecosystem, because it's not individual technologies. We have lots of amazing individual technologies, from remote sensing, spectral analysis, AI, Internet of Things, amazing agroecosystem models, but they haven't been designed to work together. And interoperability means working together, but it's beyond. In order for APIs or application protocol interfaces for technology to talk to each other, people have to talk to each other. So we have to actually build the communities and the connections and build the trust across the tools and communities that are maintaining those technologies. So I attribute this to Aaron Alt with Purdue University's OpenAg, their OAT Center, for creating this statement. Interoperability means working together. So that's a big piece of our problem statement. Next slide. So we do this by, again, looking across those different silos and building working groups, first around making sure the tech works together, but also making sure that the tech links with our field methods and the best science out there, and collaborating with the research universities to use the tech and develop the tech, applying it and developing hubs and networks across existing production systems and their communities, and then building a system-centered design group, and then also making sure, if it's going to be adopted, that we're increasing equity in the technology and in agriculture, because again, historically, we've limited in terms of our potential for adoption in terms of the way our technology and agricultural systems have been rolled out. So a big part of our design system is increasing equity and access. Next slide, please. And then again, theory to practice is absolutely critical. So open technology ecosystem, because it needs to, it's not just the technology, it's the connection of the technology, but fundamentally it needs to be applied on the ground. Otherwise it's useless. Agriculture is fundamentally an applied science. It's great to have all the theory and fundamental, but to actually translate into environmental outcomes change, and economic livelihoods improvement, we actually need to actually apply it. And we need to work with the social science of actually getting the practices on the ground. And this is why, again, it's a public-private partnership. That's part of our sort of foundational funding and reason for being, is applied and public-private partnership endeavor. And so we're building a national and international network to make sure that what we're building is actually being built with land stewards and producers, farmers and ranchers on the ground, helping to co-create those solutions. Next. And so this is, again, one of the cores, as we talked about some of the barriers that Kate mentioned in terms of creating measurement, reporting, and verification, is that there's real barriers in terms of confusion and the transaction costs to create the data that we're collecting to make new claims, to create new environmental assets that have value, needs to be more than the cost of collecting it. And so we have a very simple sort of statement that we're working with in terms of the design of the tools, using existing tools that are out there, but we feel like we should, from a producer's perspective, be able to enter that data once and use it many times. And so that if it has value for a private enterprise and value for public science, you shouldn't have to enter it and go to the extreme expense of sending folks out again and again to collect it. If it's already been collected for one purpose, you should be able to use it for another. And I think one of the key things that comes this balance, I have this public science and private enterprise side of things that's so important, is that we need to create mechanisms to share high quality information without compromising privacy. So we talk about open data, but open source means being able to create tools that are trusted and can make things that need to be private, like financial information or sensitive yield information or environmental information specific to an operation, private if it needs to be private, and then be able to make it public and share and with attribution when it has the benefit to being public, and then being able to have that data inform from the field level observation to be able to create remote sensing calibrations to improve the kinds of models that, like Comet Farm that Kate mentioned, and then ultimately using all of that to drive better decision making. So next. So this is, again, the opportunities that if we enter data once and use it many times, we can gather this really high quality information at the field level for agronomic purposes, for planning purposes, and benchmark, and some of the best management at the field level is creating high quality field level observations around soil health and the kinds of things that we're all talked about that are necessary to drive things like really detailed scope 3 emissions. It's really challenging to gather this if it hasn't already been gathered for some other purpose. So our focus is very much how do we generate the best possible level of information for producers at the farm level that they can use for their own purpose and then share for research and development purposes to improve the quality of the models and the tools that are then using. That's then the same information that has additional value for things like scope 3 emissions or effectiveness for conservation cost accounting for governmental purposes. It's also the same data that's necessary to then package into new asset types in terms of claims around carbon emissions, water quality, biodiversity. All of that is really can be attested by third parties to create new claims that's based on, again, that initial observation at the farm level. So very important sort of concept if we can build on life cycle assessment or MRV as a byproduct of good farm management planning. So how do we do that? Next slide. Well, part of it is, again, this interoperability across that to make it actually useful for the farm. But let's move on. Next slide. So trust. So one of the orientations that we're taking in developing new tools and technologies, one of the key things that OpenTEAM does is develop open source tools and technologies and steward those. And one of the cores there is really the creation of an ag data wallet. And that's really very much like you might imagine your own wallet, where you have your library card or your driver's license, but also account information and preferences and how you share that based on access to your safe deposit box or to your brokerage account. So that is a fundamentally different way than a lot of data is currently handled, which is aggregating it all together and then you have to ask for it back. So this is a very different orientation, but we think it's absolutely critical as we're going to aggregate data at scale that has value and is going to be able to create and support the new kinds of marketplaces that we think are out there based on that require trust and complex transactions and new types of contract types. So next, we need a way to manage that that's trusted. So that puts individual producers that are creating the value on the land, that are creating the observations, and their financiers and their technical service support in the driver's seat for creating the observations that create these new kinds of assets and create verifiable attestations in the field of what happened, when, where, that can actually hold up in robust marketplaces. So there's a lot of infrastructure that we're working on there that allows producers to, again, make it private first, and then opt in with contracts in terms of how to share. So we talk about complex data use agreements as being the core of driving these new marketplaces and the new kinds of contracts. So we have to have the technical, social, and legal structures to actually support these new marketplaces. And that's what's possible. That's what we're building today. And building directly in partnership with, I'm pleased to say, with some of this infrastructure aligns very well with what's moving along in terms of interoperability with USDA efforts, but also efforts internationally to align these interoperable sort of data services. But we'll skip that for now. Next slide. Oh, next slide. Yeah, so from the producer's perspective, this is actually the idea of common onboarding, so that regardless of your production system, if you're range management or row crop production or orchards or vineyards, that each part of what we're getting to is that, yes, we're creating commodities, but we're also creating new kinds of products that are non-fungible. They're place-based. They have unique attributes, social, environmental attributes that are unique, and yet we also need to aggregate them. So this common onboarding is a way of gathering that data in a consistent way so that, again, it goes into the data wallet, but it can also be pulled together and visualized and be made useful for the producer. So next. So we've been working with efforts like Regen One Alliance to build some of those visualizations, sort of using icon-based representations of some of those attributes. In conjunction with folks like Google Foods and Whole Foods and Compass Foods, Sedesco, and others to help build some of the structure for common onboarding across the diverse landscape. Next. One of the key things, again, is being able to create cooperation, and because, again, this is a tremendous amount of technical marketplace, new marketplaces to navigate. So we think that it's very important to create the ability technologically, socially, legally to aggregate and manage producers as groups, very much like farmer cooperatives have historically to create a cooperative silo or manage their part of their common infrastructure. The same is really true as we're looking at environmental markets, and this is happening a lot actually in Australia with Farmers Mutual, and creating very much a cooperative data structure to negotiate on behalf of larger groups of farmers. This gets to what Kate was talking about in terms of the scale and complexity and confusion. And being able to create trusted fiduciary relationships or proxies to manage individual producers on their behalf for their benefit. So next. So another piece here also gets to some of what was spoken about early or by several of the other speakers in terms of the numbers of marketplaces and claims out there. One of the things that OpenTEAM did in this last year was convene a number of those market places and market buyers together and recognizing to help reduce confusion and allow for those claims to interact and to be stacked on for producers and to reduce confusion between sort of governmental programs, supply chain incentive programs, and other environmental claims that may or may not conflict, that there's a real need to build an environmental claims clearinghouse. And so that uses clear, that creates some common interoperability for those claims so that they can be quickly assessed whether there's a conflict or not, to be able to be easily assessed in the marketplace in terms of their quality and quality in terms of what are their core attributes. Do they conflict in their boundaries, their duration, the claimant, the issuer, and very importantly, we have diversity of claim types as we've talked about, whether it's biodiversity or specifics in terms of the carbon claims that are being made. Often, the value of that is different depending on the context, whether it's a scope 3 claim, whether it's a private market, public market, and ideally these one claim in one market doesn't preclude a different claim on a different attribute in the same land. And that's really important to really build innovation and also trust to be able to move this forward. And so part of our ongoing work is to create that digital structure to define those claims so that they can be easily cleared and related to one another and easily communicated in human readable way as well as computer readable. Next. So another piece of this is, again, that while we're creating markets in private enterprise to create public goods, we're also creating public goods. That's part of what we're doing is climate mitigation and telling the story of biodiversity, these things that we value collectively, but they're going to be produced by individuals on their own enterprises. So how do we tell that story? How do we communicate how we do that best? And so this is where I think, certainly USDA has been doing some of this work, and there's more to be done in partnership with private enterprise to collect some of this high quality soils information, biodiversity information, water quality information that sticks with the land, like a registry of deeds that we can contribute to and reference. And that's really important also as a marker as we're looking at things like environmental claims clearinghouses, to say what, if you think about a registry of deeds, do a search. What claims are on this land? What history, what management has been done that's part of the public record? So this is an important piece of the data structure that we're helping to build that's now possible. Next. And then, there's some really complex things that we're able to do also on a peer-to-peer level to help, and that also drive the markets. And these are things like we're building actually with General Mills, this digital coffee shop, which is a benchmarking tool that allows producers or groups of producers, or either anonymously or to form trusted groups where they can share detailed information about their operations, either explicitly exposing themselves, their operation in detail, or giving generalized anonymous information, but being able to, most importantly, benchmark and find where they're similar to somebody, and then also importantly, what did somebody else do a little differently, and do that in a secure way on a communications platform. And so that benchmarking for a peer-to-peer level also is providing the core data to drive things like the data visualizations and the ranking and the asset creation in terms of benchmarking possible and performance data across the board, from nutrient density to soil health measurements to profitability to you name it, price discovery. All of these things are, again, data driven, and we want to be able to benchmark and then measure change over time and progress. And so there's some exciting things in terms of technical developments to make this really complex, both legal and technical infrastructure for sharing, and the statistics and the statistic packages accessible and usable even to a fairly non-technical audience. So really unlocking a lot of potential there. Next. And then ultimately, again, bringing this down into human accessible indicators that can be represented in producer dashboards, in individual producer fingerprints that can be represented directly on everything from global marketplaces and benchmarking towards science-based goals for Scope 3 emissions or other company goals to local farmers markets and consumer packaging. So next slide. Yeah, so this is kind of this range that we can, that is data-driven story sharing that we can get towards, but it really have to build on it step by step. But the exciting thing is that's really the possibility and the potential when we start to build some of this common infrastructure and create, and I'd be remiss not to acknowledge one of our major funders, the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, in developing this pre-competitive environment, so we can start to build on one another's efforts to build some of this key infrastructure to support these new diverse and exciting marketplaces. So I think that's the last slide. Thank you so much, and look forward to the discussion.
Well, thank you, Dorn. And Dorn, I hadn't seen your presentation for probably almost 2 years, and it's amazing how much OpenTEAM has grown and evolved over the last 2 years. So thank you to each of our panelists, Keith, Michele, Kate, Fernanda, Dorn, you've cast a very wide range of the measurement, the reporting, and now the challenge is, how does this start to come together as we're looking at things? I'm going to go to the Q's and A's that are out there and start to bring some of these things into play as we start to look through the questions that are come in. First off, a question came in from Alec Eccles about, and this is probably as much Kate as anybody, what is USDA doing to assure, unlike the Chesapeake Bay model, that the USDA data is correctly reflected in EPA and USGS models as it pertains to GHG? I think that's probably yours, Kate.
Sure. Well, the data collection feeds the models. It's kind of the activity data that's collected is what describes how those emissions estimates change over time. And the data that underscores the models are a lot of the different data sets that USDA also helps to build. And much of that is underlying science that's invested by our Agricultural Research Service, our Natural Resources Conservation Service, and the work that they do to better build, how those emissions estimates can best reflect what's happening on the ground. So I can't maybe speak specifically to the Chesapeake Bay model, but certainly there's a lot of work that's gone into providing credibility for the estimates that those models are generating. And I think, Dorn did a great job of describing how complex it is to collect and underscore the science behind all of those models.
Well, and Kate, while we've got you on the spot, let me do a couple of follow-up questions. You saw Marone Bio had contracted with Michelle's team to do the LCA work around their particular products. Do you see a time where that information, that specific LCA information eventually feeds into the kind of data that is important for USDA? Is that possible today? Is it possible in the future? How does this macro data about a product equate to agriculture's entire GHG impact as it goes into an EPA or to your magic blue book that you're going to be updating?
Sure. It's a great question, Bruce. And I don't know that I have the answer for you. We're kind of in this time where the systems that we've used throughout history to collect the data that we use to reflect a whole variety of environmental impacts are kind of changing. We're moving towards things like remote sensing. We're looking towards other sources of data. And in some cases, it is data that's collected by the private sector. And one example that's relevant to the greenhouse gas inventory that we've been working on recently is looking at improved data on animal diets, because that has a lot to do with emissions from both enteric and manure. And the data that we collected at USDA was outdated. So we actually looked to the private sector and found some iFeeder data that's from the animal industry representative that collected a lot of information on animal diets at the state level that we were able to use to update the inventory. So it is kind of happening to an extent that we're using both publicly sourced and collected data and credible private sector collected data as a way to better reflect the estimates that we're generating.
Dorn, you want to jump in on this one? How does the kind of platform you're building with open source, all this work, interact with these same USDA models? How does it roll up, and especially how do you deal with the challenges of the privacy requirements that are very strict from the Farm Bill and the interaction on these models?
Yeah, no, I think it's such a great question. It's at the center of our challenge here, is being able to, and this is, I think, for the kind of research that we have to do across the board, is so much of this is a new kind of research that is very difficult to do in isolation in the lab. It's really, really best done on the farm in context. And that brings up all of those questions that you're bringing up, Bruce, in terms of that the challenge of handling that data. And part of it isn't just the data type or the privacy, also the scale of the data, that we're really often working at the microbiome or below and analyzing that in a very specific context. And then how do you roll that up into the landscape or a big claim that a company wants to make? And so that's sort of the central sort of piece that we're looking at is what are the points of aggregation and summary and the value of doing that so that you can hand that off but still trust the result, right? And be able to aggregate that. And we're seeing this, but amazing potential when we start to do that in terms of the questions we can ask and the pace at which we can answer them. But it is exactly that challenge. And it's not really, I would say, Bruce, that it's a little bit less technical and much more social in terms of building those relationships and trust and saying who's handling which step and then what happens next. So there's a bunch of sort of negotiation and conversations and maintenance of the language and the standards across groups. That's what we find we do a lot at OpenTEAM, is actually saying, you said this term, what are we actually going to use if we're going to aggregate this and then hand it off to somebody else? Because they mean kind of the same thing. But that's a huge amount of our work right now, is actually sort of bringing that together. And it's true across USDA too, or any within a company even. So, but I'm really optimistic about that because the returns are so great. The potential in terms of pace of research and the insights we can answer when we're asking one question, but we can answer 50 others if we start to combine the data.
I appreciate, Dorn, what you're saying about the social engagement and pertaining to the trust. But I want to pull Michele into this conversation, because Michele, you're following ISO standards with a very specific scientific parameter around what you can do to tackle these LCA issues. Are you going to be able to use what OpenTEAM will ultimately produce in the future for LCA analysis? Does this work? Is it relevant? Pulling you in the same way I pulled Kate in and put her on the spot. So, Michele?
Yeah, it's hard to answer until I would actually look at the data and if how it's been validated. We always bring in an industry expert for every project we do. Even when we do an update on a company, we bring in the expert again to look at the data, because the data is changing all the time. So the thing about the LCA approach is it's very current. So if the data is really current, yes, we should be able to use it. We'd like to be able to use it. I think it'd be great if we could talk about a specific type of data, and then we could dive into I don't know, maybe an emissions factors around soil or something like that. And then we could see how that data could be interpreted and used in our analysis.
So I'll just jump in once more, Bruce, because I think this is such an important point, that I think part of this is also working with the technical service providers in the field and giving them the training and the tools and the criteria, so that when they're out there, that's the expensive part, to equip them with the protocols so that they know that if they're collecting it this way, and they may require a third-party verifier while they're doing it, but that it will be accepted, because that's the opportunity too. But we need to equip our technical service providers in the field with the knowledge and the tools to do a good job. And so that's sort of the training piece as well as a sort of investment.
Yeah, Bruce, I'll just jump in.
You're wanting to jump in on this?
Yeah, just one theme I see in all of these presentations is we see a lot of tools available to growers. We see a lot of things that growers can be doing that go well beyond carbon sequestration. I think we all are challenged that the carbon sequestration, carbon trading models, platforms that are out there now don't have a lot of utility for growers. If it's when you look at the forestry model and the paperwork that's got to get filled out, Dorn's getting to an answer with that. But at the end of the day, for any of this to work, and to encourage adoption, somebody's got to put a value on a practice, and that's really where we need the USDA, the government, to step in and work with industry, well, just a broad stakeholder community, and start placing value on all the different ecosystem services and practices that growers can do, or we're really gonna miss an opportunity. You know, when my interactions with grower groups is, they look at RFPs, kind of data that has to be submitted for carbon trading platforms, and it just does not seem like it's worth their time for the payout they're going to get for it. And I do think that it's going to be a grave injustice to the agriculture community if we can't figure out a way to weave all of these tools together. And Dorn's his approach, I think, is a solid one. But the thing we do need is valuation placed on practices, because we also know that one of the concerns about promoting these kind of practices with growers is concern around greenwashing. And somebody's got, everybody's general counsel's office is like, unless you got something that can prove it, you can't say that. And we've really got to figure that out to really make this work. And all the threads are there. We just got to go through the painful process of weaving it all together.
So let's unpack that a little bit more with all of you. How are we going to weave this together? Keith, you were very transparent. You've commissioned Michelle's team to do LCA work on your particular products to give us what is the GHG yield on that. But yet, when we look at Kate's chart that outlined the carbon markets that exist today, the voluntary markets and the platforms that exist for farmers today, none of those will buy the practice change that your firm is offering. They're primarily focused on each of them a soil sequestration strategy that leans heavily on cover crops or no-till and a few other things, but largely ignores the rest of the basket. So for all of you, what are the one or two things that most need to be engaged in to get to a more dynamic marketplace that starts to bring all of this in?
Well, for me, you got to look broader than carbon sequestration. I mean, it's important, and it's part of our climate change response. But we need to recognize there's a lot more that agriculture is providing as services to broader society and to the environment. We've got to capture those. And again, I'll just hit my evaluation button again. The theme that I commonly get in all of my discussions is if somebody is recognized as being legitimate, sets of value around a practice, and we come up with a way to basically confirm that practice has occurred on a farm. The private sector's very interested in creating instruments around things that are broader than just carbon sequestration, and I think we need to reach forward. And I also do think that as we talk about a farm bill that moves away from traditional incentivization to growers and looks more broadly at ecosystem services, we need that valuation done.
Other panelists want to jump in on this? Kate?
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in here. This is a really interesting discussion, and I think there's a couple moving pieces here. Absolutely, I think there's room to incorporate more than just greenhouse gas emissions and carbon sequestration into these valuation systems. And I think you're right, Keith, that's really important, and it paints a much more comprehensive picture of the environmental footprint of our goods and services. And you're mentioning a lot like valuation, like how do we value this? How do we get that value to the farmer, and how do we connect that to consumers? And that's really, I mean, there's kind of two main ways to do it. It's like public sector programs, like our conservation programs, and private sector incentives and markets. And right now, I think we're kind of trying to use all the tools in the toolbox at USDA to help those markets grow. Certainly, we have strong investment in our conservation programs, but it is, we're looking at these private sector markets and thinking like, wow, there's a lot of potential here. And I think we just need to figure out where the triggers are that we can pull and adjust those market economics to unleash that valuation chain. And I think that's why one of the reasons we've put this $1 billion program online, which is, okay, we've heard loud and clear from stakeholders across the value chain that this is critical and that we want to unleash these market mechanisms. But we're still in the midst of trying to figure out all those tough questions that, you all have outlined and the Dorne has outlined on, how do we collect the data? How do we manage it? How do we provide credibility and avoid greenwashing? While at the same time creating these systems that pencil out at the end of the day, because that's the only way we're going to drive change. Like, you can have a great, extremely credible marketplace out there that has no activity on it because it doesn't pencil out to make the change happen. So I think we still have a lot of questions to answer, which is why we're doing this pilot to help sort of address some of those issues. And yes, we're starting with greenhouse gas emissions and climate change, but I think it could apply much more broadly to a broader suite of ecosystem services.
And Bruce, I did see a question about the EU, and I'll just put it out there
Yes.
that, the discussion we're having right now is happening over there as well. Last month, the EU did basically publish a draft sustainable use regulation, no longer a directive. So they're actually going to put hard numbers around it. And they're looking at, use and risk reduction around the use of pesticides, and they're tying basically integrated pest management into the cap payments that growers will receive. So I think everybody sees the value of having a discussion broader than just carbon sequestration and greenhouse gas emissions. Very important, but let's try and capture everything. So these aren't going to be easy discussions, but I think everybody sees the value of trying to make it work. And I do think this dialogue that we're trying to kick off around IPM, or integrated crop management, and start looking at all these different tools and how we weave them together, is an important part of that process.
And Keith, thank you for bringing me back to following the Q's and A's that had come in from folks. Did any of the other panelists want to jump in on the question about, can you compare and contrast what's evolving in the US versus the EU? Did anyone else want to make reference to that? Thank you, Keith, for answering that from your company's perspective.
One thing I'll say, this is Michelle, is I do hope, because the ag sector is so big, I do hope we can maybe take it piecemeal a little bit and do it for some. It would be great to see a single industry, a smaller kind of industry, that where the kind of valuation is clearer, and we could include biodiversity metrics as well as GHG metrics, but where we could maybe have a test case or what have you of using these different types of credits or financial incentives to allow growers and producers and their customers and the other stakeholders to kind of understand how this can make business work for them. So that's just my outside observation. I do agree with Keith that it would be really helpful, given that there's a tradition with ecosystem service exchanges, and there does seem to be, I've heard about some talk about some pushback on the carbon markets from a lot of the traditional farming community. It would be nice to see building on something they're already familiar with, which is what these ecosystem service exchanges often are, because they've already been used in conservation markets. But anyway, just my 2 cents.
And I'll jump in on that, but I'd love to get back a little bit to sort of some of the things that are sort of that we can do to take some first steps here. I'll just mention that interoperability across boundaries has been the foundation, certainly from OpenTEAM from the beginning, although we're very much US based and very much starting with, working with, say, USDA soil data. From the beginning, most of the larger buyers or companies that are part of this have international operations and are going to be working with FAO soils maps. And so I think from a units perspective, from an interoperability perspective, we've always felt like that's when we're talking about environmental service markets, they really do need to be internationally accessible. And that's been part of our strategy to make sure we have representatives in India and Australia or Sub-Saharan Africa or Western Europe that are actively engaged in our field methods work and are developing the units and making sure that the databases and the services we're working on are going to be interoperable. So there's some great initiatives that are very internationally focused that are connecting right now. The CGIAR network with Foundation for Food, there's a call this Friday about ontologies and interoperability. So there's some great things to tap in there. But on the other thing, I wanted to come back because I thought that was, there's so many opportunities that Keith mentioned with IPM as an example of this fairly, there's a lot of record keeping, detailed record keeping, whether it's IPM or Food Safety Modernization Act or organic certification, all these things, or the existing field visits that we have with USDA technical assistance or conservation districts that are collecting really detailed information already. We're already paying for so much of this. And I think that's the great opportunity where we've already have the budgets, we've already spent it, we're spending it for other reasons, but it can lead towards greater confidence in claims if it's aggregated in a better way, and where it's already on existing private balance, private expenses in some cases. Can we get more out of that? So I think there's a huge opportunity to drop the cost of making a claim by leveraging existing cost in accounting and digitizing a lot of these records in a consistent way, just like we've done with QuickBooks in financial management. So I think that's a huge opportunity to help drop the cost, increase the utility. And I think that's the other sort of, what are those early wins, those incentives for getting the data in? The other thing I think is really empowering those technical the folks who are in the field doing that work already to do that one little step on behalf of the farmer and get it in their hands, create this new, there's value in that isn't being recognized. I think we're leaving money on the table, I think, in that process. So I think that to me is sort of one of the big opportunities. And that's kind of what I meant by like MRV as a byproduct of existing work. Can we create that baseline documentation as part of what we're already doing? And then that water claim or that carbon credit comes in 3 to 4 years because you document it for some other reason, but it's there, it's baseline documentation. So that's, and then the marginal, the cost of making that claim is zero because you've paid for it in other ways. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Dorn. Let me get back to a couple of these questions. I really need to honor the participants' desires for some of these. Here's one came from Eric Norrell. I believe this probably goes to you, Kate. Has USDA begun to measure the energy carbon needs to administer its programs? Just as we ask how much funding it takes to achieve an environmental benefit, can we ask how much CO2e is used by buildings, vehicles, et cetera, to achieve a ton of soil carbon storage from equip, for example?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it goes to a lot of what Michele and Fernanda talked about, which is more of like a life cycle look at how things are administered by USDA. Right now, we're focused more on the benefit side. It's sort of what are the benefits in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, not what are the greenhouse gas emissions that go into providing those benefits. And partially that's because of the way that we account for greenhouse gas emissions on a national scale, which is split out by industry. So transportation emissions would be reflected in the transportation sector. Industrial emissions would be reflected in the industrial sector. But it would be really interesting to look at sort of what is the total footprint greenhouse gas wise in terms of benefits and the emissions that go into administering some of this. I imagine that would come out way in the green because some of these programs like the Conservation Reserve Program just provide so much in terms of carbon benefits and sequestration, but it would be an interesting analysis.
Okay, this is going to be speed dating, so I'm going to kick through several of these more quickly. Another one came from Gary Blumenthal. How do ag sustainability markets avoid the broad brush smearing of being weak, like many current ESG claims? Who wants to take this one on? This one's a little philosophical and a little bit science. So
I feel like we're all we're aware of what the holdups are for adoption, and it is validation, but it's also, again, valuation of practices. So I do think we're trying to build systems that have data rigor around, good data rigor around them to make the case. But again, there's a lot of important pieces out there that we've just got to weave together. But we're all contributing our bits to this discussion with that in mind, that at the end of the day, the information's got to be rock solid.
I had a question from Gina Nichols here. I think this is going to Michele and Fernanda's work. For aquatic toxicity, why aren't amphibians considered in the slide presentation you did?
I'll take that one. Just
Okay.
Mainly, I guess short answer is regulators don't require that toxicity data yet. I do think arguably there is a case to be made that amphibians are more of an environmental indicator than a minnow. But it's been a long time since any regulatory agencies updated their toxicity guidelines. So it's a long process, and one that we continue to engage EPA on. A lot of us are trying to encourage them from moving away from animal models. I think we're at a point where we probably don't need to be killing so many animals to run a risk assessment. But this is all an important discussion. But guidelines need to be updated, and they haven't.
Another toxicity question, or another one on this one. When comparing the biodiversity metrics of crop protection products, are you considering the different exposure levels under the product's intended use in addition to potential toxicity? This is key to risk communication and often misunderstood by consumers. Keith?
Yeah, and I would say that the model that we developed with Boundless, the question there is not only the hazard exposure, but the amount that's going out on the field, right? So the metrics we are using capture both the hazard and exposure component when we define those endpoints.
Okay, and look, now I've got one last question in the queue here. This came in from John Foltz. It says, it seems to me that a large part of the benefits of what is being discussed are public benefits. Setting up markets, certification, standardization, et cetera, is important for people to trust what's going on. But will the payment for these benefits ultimately come from the public purse, i.e. tax dollars? Who wants to tackle this one first? Kate, you've got some experience.
Yeah, it's a great question, John. And I think we're going to need both. I'm going to be honest. It's not just public investments, but it's unleashing those markets that allow for private sector investments to create change on the ground that is really going to be critical to meeting a whole host of environmental challenges. And so, we're kind of at the stage where we're just trying to figure out how to unlock those private sector markets. And I think that's at the bottom of what we're talking about today is, how do we report and provide a credible system to track and ensure those environmental benefits. That's one that also works at scale and works on the ground and taps into those consumer and market drivers that allow it to happen. And I think it's going to be both. It's like we need our public sector investments. We need to continue providing those programs that I talked about, and we also need to tap into those private sector markets that are going to help provide the incentives we need to see as well.
And with that, I'm going to have to give Kate the last word, because as I'm looking at this, we're at 11:58. I'm supposed to hand the mic back to Martha King to wrap up here, but I want to express my appreciation for each of the panelists for an outstanding discussion, and for the participants for a group of great set of questions, and for tolerating all of these things. I want to turn it now to Martha for close, but thank you very much for participation.
Sure. Thank you, Bruce, and thanks to all of our speakers for the insightful discussion today. I'd also like to thank all of you in the audience for joining us and submitting your questions. We appreciate your engagement with us, and we would love to hear your feedback. So please take a moment to share your comments about today's session in the brief survey you will see at the conclusion of this forum. If you'd like to help us continue providing valuable programming such as today's forum, I'll quickly remind you about becoming a friend of Farm Foundation. Check the link provided in the chat to learn more. Each and every gift to Farm Foundation strengthens our ability to address rapidly evolving issues impacting agriculture, the food system, and rural communities, and we are so grateful for your support. Thank you once again for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.